There comes a moment in almost everyone's life when they begin asking a painful question. Why does it feel like the more I give, the less I'm appreciated? You answer every message. You make yourself available whenever someone needs you. You give your time without hesitation, your loyalty without conditions, and your patience without complaint. Yet somehow, instead of becoming more valued, you begin to feel almost invisible. People assume you'll always be there. They stop noticing your effort. They stop thanking you. And eventually, they stop seeing your presence as something meaningful. At first, you blame yourself. Maybe you're not doing enough. Maybe you need to try harder. Maybe if you become even more understanding, even more supportive, they'll finally recognize your worth. So you give even more. But strangely, nothing changes. If anything, it becomes worse. The Stoics recognized this pattern long before modern psychology gave it a name. They understood that value isn't determined solely by what you offer. It's also shaped by how your presence is experienced. And when your attention becomes automatic, it slowly loses the power it once carried. This doesn't mean becoming cold. It doesn't mean playing games. And it certainly doesn't mean manipulating people. It means learning one of the most overlooked forms of wisdom. Not everything valuable should be available all the time. Today, we'll explore why constantly chasing approval weakens your presence, why explaining yourself often gives away your peace, and why the quiet strength of intentional distance can completely transform the way you move through life. By the end of this video, you'll understand that disappearing isn't about running away from people. It's about returning to yourself. Most people believe appreciation is earned through consistency. And to a certain extent, that's true. Consistency builds trust. It creates reliability. It shows integrity. But there is another side to consistency that few people ever notice. When something becomes endlessly available, the human mind gradually stops paying attention to it. Think about something simple. When you first move into a new home, you notice everything. The smell of the rooms, the sound of the neighborhood, the morning sunlight through the windows. Months later, those same details fade into the background. They haven't disappeared. Your mind has simply adapted. This is how human attention works. What is constantly present slowly becomes ordinary. The extraordinary becomes expected. And what becomes expected often goes unnoticed. The same thing happens in relationships. If someone always replies immediately, always agrees, always makes themselves available, eventually, their presence becomes assumed instead of appreciated. Not because they lack value, but because the mind naturally adjusts to what never changes. The Stoics understood this without needing psychological studies. They observed human nature carefully. They recognized that awareness depends on contrast. Without moments of absence, presence begins to lose its emotional weight. Epictetus repeatedly reminded his students that real freedom begins with self-governance. A person who cannot decide where their own attention goes eventually allows everyone else to decide for them. Think about how many people live this way. Their mood depends on whether someone replies. Their confidence rises or falls based on another person's approval. Their peace disappears the moment someone becomes distant. Without realizing it, they've handed ownership of their emotional life to circumstances they cannot control. The Stoics considered this one of the greatest forms of slavery. Not slavery of the body, slavery of the mind. Because whenever your happiness depends entirely on someone else's behavior, you've surrendered the one thing that truly belongs to you, your inner freedom. This is where many people misunderstand the idea of stepping back. They imagine it means ignoring everyone, becoming emotionally unavailable, pretending not to care. That's not Stoicism. Stoicism never encourages emotional games. Instead, it teaches intentional living. There is an enormous difference between disappearing because you're trying to force someone's attention and stepping back because you've remembered your own value. One comes from fear. The other comes from self-respect. The first asks, how can I make them notice me? The second asks, am I giving my attention where it truly belongs? Those questions lead to completely different lives. Marcus Aurelius spent years surrounded by people who constantly demanded something from him. Advice, leadership, justice, decisions, approval. As emperor, He could have spent every waking hour trying to satisfy everyone's expectations, but he knew something impossible would happen if he tried. The more completely he belonged to everyone else, the less he belonged to himself. That's why he continually reminded himself that a person's first responsibility is the condition of their own character, not their popularity, not their reputation, not universal approval. Character, because reputation lives in other people's minds. Character lives in your own. One changes constantly. The other stays with you every day of your life. There's another subtle mistake people often make. When they begin feeling overlooked, they assume the solution is to increase their effort. They send another message, offer more help, explain themselves more clearly, become even more available. It feels logical. If appreciation is fading, surely giving more will restore it. But life rarely works that way. Imagine trying to make someone notice a song that's been playing continuously in the background. Turning the volume up doesn't always help. Sometimes the mind has already stopped listening. The issue isn't quantity, it's awareness. The Stoics understood that awareness returns when actions become intentional instead of automatic. That's why quiet restraint often carries more weight than endless effort. Not because restraint is mysterious, but because intention is memorable. Think about someone you've always admired. Was it because they constantly demanded your attention? Probably not. More often, it was because their presence carried purpose. When they spoke, there was thought behind their words. When they acted, there was direction behind their actions. When they chose silence, it wasn't awkward. It was comfortable. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing felt desperate. Everything seemed deliberate. That kind of presence cannot be faked. It grows from inner stability. And inner stability begins when you stop measuring your worth by how quickly other people respond to you. Here's a question worth asking yourself. Where in your life have you become automatic? Do you immediately apologize whenever tension appears? Do you rush to explain every misunderstanding? Do you instantly respond because silence makes you uncomfortable? Or do you constantly chase people who rarely make the effort to meet you halfway? These habits often feel like kindness. Sometimes they're simply fear wearing the mask of generosity, fear of rejection, fear of being forgotten, fear of disappointing someone. The Stoics believe courage begins the moment we become honest enough to recognize those fears without allowing them to control us. Because once your actions stop being chosen, they become habits, and habits eventually become invisible, even to yourself. This is why intentional presence is so powerful, not because it creates mystery, but because it creates awareness. When every action becomes a conscious choice instead of an automatic reaction, people experience you differently. More importantly, you experience yourself differently. You stop speaking simply because silence feels uncomfortable. You stop saying yes when your heart wants to say no. You stop chasing conversations that no longer deserve your energy. Instead, every word becomes deliberate. Every commitment becomes meaningful. Every act of kindness becomes genuine rather than expected. And slowly, something remarkable begins to happen. Not only do others begin treating your presence differently, you begin respecting it yourself. This is where the journey truly begins. Not with dramatic disappearances. Not with playing hard to get. Not with trying to make anyone miss you. It begins with something much quieter. A small pause before saying yes. A little more thought before explaining yourself. A willingness to let silence exist without rushing to fill it. These tiny changes may seem insignificant, yet they completely alter the rhythm of your life. Because once your actions stop being automatic, they start becoming intentional. And intention has a quiet power that people instinctively notice. There is something fascinating about the human mind. It quickly becomes comfortable with patterns. When someone always behaves the same way, we begin to predict them without thinking. We know they'll answer immediately. We know they'll forgive without question. We know they'll always be available. Eventually, we stop paying close attention. Predictability creates comfort, but it can also create invisibility. This isn't a flaw in human nature. It's simply how attention works. The brain is constantly searching for change. It notices movement, contrast, unexpected moments. Anything that interrupts routine immediately captures awareness. Think about walking through your neighborhood. You hardly notice the houses you've passed hundreds of times. But if one morning a familiar house is painted a completely different color, your attention goes straight to it. The house didn't become more valuable overnight. It simply became noticeable again. The same principle applies to the way people experience your presence. When every response is predictable, your behavior fades into the background, not because people don't care, because certainty rarely demands attention. This is why the Stoics placed such importance on intentional action. They weren't interested in living on autopilot. Every decision, every response, every moment of silence was meant to come from conscious choice rather than emotional habit. Most people don't realize how much of their day is driven by unconscious patterns. Someone ignores a message. They immediately send another. Someone becomes distant. They instantly worry they've done something wrong. Someone criticizes them. They rush to explain themselves before taking a single breath. Notice what's happening. The outside world is making every decision. Their actions aren't being chosen. They're being triggered. The Stoics believed this was one of the greatest obstacles to freedom. Because if every external event determines your next move, are you really directing your own life? Or are you simply reacting to everyone else's? Imagine a quiet lake. When the wind is strong, the surface moves in every direction. It reflects nothing clearly. But when the wind settles, the water becomes calm enough to mirror the sky. Your mind works the same way. Every emotional reaction is another gust of wind. Every impulsive response creates another ripple. Soon you can no longer see clearly. This is why Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself to pause before acting, not because hesitation is strength, but because clarity requires stillness. The strongest decisions rarely come from emotional urgency. They come from deliberate thought. One of the greatest mistakes people make is believing they need to do more to regain someone's attention. More messages, more explanations, more effort, more availability. But repeating the same pattern only strengthens that pattern. Imagine trying to wake someone by whispering the same sentence over and over. Repeating it louder doesn't necessarily make it meaningful. Sometimes meaning isn't created through repetition. It's created through change. This doesn't mean becoming inconsistent or unreliable. It means becoming intentional. Instead of reacting instantly, you pause. Instead of speaking immediately, you consider. Instead of explaining every action, you allow your choices to speak for themselves. These are small adjustments, yet they create enormous differences, because people notice what breaks expectations. Think about someone who always finishes your sentences. Eventually you stop paying attention because you already know what they're going to say. Now imagine someone who listens carefully before responding, who speaks only after considering their words, whose answers feel thoughtful rather than automatic. Which person commands more respect? Almost always the second, not because they speak more, because every word carries weight. The Stoics understood that restraint gives language its value. Words spoken constantly lose their impact. Words chosen carefully become memorable. The same is true of your attention. There is another lesson hidden beneath this idea. Most people believe explaining themselves creates understanding. Sometimes it does. But very often, constant explanation reveals something else. Anxiety. Think about how often people over-explain simple decisions. They worry someone might misunderstand them, so they keep talking. They justify every choice, clarify every sentence, defend every action. Ironically, the more they explain, the less confident they appear. Why? Because endless explanation often communicates uncertainty. A person who trusts their own decisions doesn't feel compelled to defend every one of them. That doesn't mean refusing honest conversation. It means recognizing that not every misunderstanding deserves immediate correction. Epictetus encouraged his students to become comfortable with being misunderstood when the alternative required sacrificing their peace. That's a difficult lesson, but it's one that transforms the way you interact with the world. Imagine someone assumes the worst about one of your decisions. Your first instinct is probably to correct them, to make sure they understand your intentions. But pause for a moment. Ask yourself, will explaining this actually improve the situation? Sometimes the answer is yes. Healthy relationships require communication. Important Misunderstandings deserve clarification, but many situations don't. Some people have already decided what they want to believe. No amount of explanation will change their minds. The Stoics understood this deeply. They never wasted energy trying to control another person's judgment. Instead, they focused on living in a way that eventually spoke louder than any defense ever could. Character has a remarkable quality. It reveals itself over time. You don't have to announce it. You simply have to protect it. There is also a quiet strength in allowing unanswered questions to remain unanswered. Most people feel uncomfortable with uncertainty. They rush to remove it. They explain. They apologize. They reassure, not because it's necessary, because silence feels uncomfortable. But silence has a purpose. It creates space, and space invites reflection. When every thought is immediately explained, there's little reason for anyone else to think deeply about it. When every silence is instantly filled, nothing has a chance to settle. The Stoics believed patience wasn't passive. It was active self-control. It was a willingness to allow life to unfold without constantly interfering. That kind of patience is rare. And because it's rare, it's powerful. Carl Jung once observed that what remains unconscious often controls our lives without us realizing it. Although Jung lived centuries after the Stoics, his insight reflects something they understood well. Much of our behavior happens automatically. We react before we think. We defend before we understand. We chase before we ask whether the pursuit is worthwhile. Awareness changes that. The moment you recognize a pattern, you regain the ability to choose differently. Instead of answering immediately, you pause. Instead of chasing reassurance, you find stability within yourself. Instead of reacting emotionally, you respond deliberately. That single shift changes every relationship you have, because you're no longer being pulled by circumstances. You're directing yourself. The interesting thing is that other people often notice this change before you do. They sense that something feels different. Your conversations become calmer. Your words become fewer, but more meaningful. Your attention no longer feels automatic. Without trying to create mystery, you become harder to predict. Not because you're playing games, because you're finally acting from intention instead of habit. That difference changes the entire rhythm of your presence. People begin listening more carefully, not because you're louder, because you've stopped wasting words. They begin respecting your time, not because you've demanded respect, because you've started respecting it yourself. Everything changes when your actions are chosen rather than triggered. But there's one final lesson that goes even deeper than silence, patience, or breaking old patterns. Many people can step back physically while remaining emotionally trapped. They stop texting, yet continue waiting. They become quieter, yet constantly wonder what everyone else is thinking. From the outside, it appears they've let go. Inside, nothing has changed. This is a final illusion the Stoics wanted us to overcome, because true freedom isn't measured by physical distance. It's measured by emotional independence. Up to this point, we've explored how intentional presence commands more respect than constant availability. We've seen why silence often carries more weight than endless explanations, and why breaking reactive habits allows you to reclaim control of your life. But none of those practices matter if your mind is still chasing what your body has left behind. This is where many people unknowingly deceive themselves. They stop sending messages. They stop calling. They become quieter. From the outside, it looks as though they've moved on. Yet every morning, they check their phone hoping for a notification. Every conversation reminds them of someone else's opinion. Every quiet moment becomes another opportunity to wonder what could have been. Nothing has really changed. The distance is physical. The attachment is still emotional. And as long as your peace depends on someone else's response, your freedom remains incomplete. The Stoics understood this better than almost anyone. Walking away is easy. Letting go internally is the real challenge. Imagine holding a rope tied to a heavy stone. At first, it doesn't feel like much. You can still walk. You can still move forward. But every step requires a little more effort because you're dragging unnecessary weight behind you. Now imagine simply releasing the rope. The stone hasn't changed. The road hasn't changed. Only one thing has changed: You're no longer carrying what was never meant to belong to you. This is what emotional detachment feels like. It isn't pretending people don't matter. It isn't becoming cold or indifferent. It's recognizing that your peace cannot remain tied to things you were never meant to control. So many people spend years dragging invisible ropes. They carry old conversations, past disappointments, broken relationships, unanswered messages, the opinions of people they may never see again. Without realizing it, yesterday continues stealing today's energy. The Stoics urge us to notice that burden, not to deny it, not to suppress it, but to ask a simple question. Why am I still carrying this? Marcus Aurelius returned to one principle again and again throughout his personal reflections. You have authority over your own mind, not over other people's choices, not over their opinions, not over whether they appreciate your efforts, only your own thoughts. At first, that idea sounds limiting. In reality, it's liberating. Think about how much energy disappears every day trying to influence things outside your control, trying to make someone understand your intentions, trying to convince people to value you, try to predict what someone else is thinking, trying to earn approval from people who have already decided how they see you. It's exhausting because it's a battle that cannot be won. No matter how carefully you explain yourself, someone may still misunderstand you. No matter how sincerely you care, someone may still walk away. No matter how much effort you invest, someone else may fail to appreciate it. If your happiness depends on changing their response, you'll spend your life chasing an outcome that was never yours to command. The Stoics refuse to live that way. Instead of asking, how can I control them? They asked, what can I control within myself? That question changes everything. Many people mistake detachment for emotional numbness, but Stoicism teaches something entirely different. A Stoic still loves deeply, still cares, still serves, still builds meaningful relationships. The difference is that their inner stability doesn't disappear when circumstances change. Imagine a tree standing in the middle of a storm. The branches move with the wind. The leaves may even fall, but the roots remain firm. The tree survives because its strength doesn't come from the weather. It comes from what lies beneath the surface. Your character works the same way. Criticism may arrive. People may leave. Plans may fail. Life may become uncertain. Yet if your roots are planted in wisdom rather than approval, you remain standing even when everything around you changes. This is the quiet strength the Stoics spent a lifetime cultivating. Not the strength to control the storm, the strength to remain grounded within it. There is another subtle lesson hidden here. Most people believe confidence comes from knowing others admire them. The Stoics believe confidence comes from knowing you have remained faithful to your own principles. Those are two very different foundations. One depends on public opinion. The other depends on private integrity. Public opinion changes constantly. Someone praises you today and criticizes you tomorrow. Someone who applauds your success may resent it next year. If your confidence rises and falls with those opinions, you'll never experience lasting peace. But integrity cannot be taken away by another person's judgment. You know whether you've acted honestly. You know whether you've kept your word. You know whether you've remained patient under pressure. Those quiet victories matter far more than public recognition because they belong entirely to you. Epictetus often reminded his students that freedom begins when we stop demanding that life unfold exactly as we imagined. Think about how much suffering comes from expectation. We expect gratitude. We expect loyalty. We expect people to respond with the same care we've shown them. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. When reality refuses to follow our expectations, frustration appears. But notice something important. The pain doesn't come only from what happened. It also comes from the picture we created beforehand. The Stoics encourage us to replace expectation with acceptance, not passive acceptance, wise acceptance. The understanding that other people remain free to make their own choices, just as you remain free to make yours. Once you embrace that truth, your relationships become healthier. You stop trying to force outcomes. You begin appreciating what exists without clinging to what cannot be controlled. There is a beautiful kind of confidence that develops from this way of living. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't seek attention. It doesn't compete. It simply exists. You probably met someone like this before. They enter a room without trying to impress anyone. They speak calmly. They listen carefully. They don't interrupt. They don't rush to defend themselves. They don't feel compelled to explain every decision. Yet, people naturally respect them. Why? Because peace has its own presence. Calmness has its own authority. Someone who isn't desperately seeking validation becomes remarkably difficult to manipulate. Nothing about them feels hurried. Nothing feels forced. Every action reflects intention rather than impulse. This is the kind of presence the Stoics hope to develop, not one built on mystery, not one built on distance, one built on inner alignment. Think back to the title of this video. Never chase, never explain, just walk away. At first glance, it sounds like advice about other people, but now you can see it's actually advice about yourself. Never chase means don't pursue validation at the expense of your peace. Never explain means don't waste your life defending your worth to those determined to misunderstand you. And just walk away doesn't always mean leaving a person. Sometimes it means walking away from insecurity, walking away from the need to be chosen, walking away from habits that keep pulling your attention outward instead of inward. That's the real journey, not away from others, toward yourself. So the next time you feel the urge to send one more message, to prove your intentions one more time, to seek one more piece of reassurance, pause, take a slow breath, ask yourself one question. Am I acting from peace or from fear? That single question may save you from repeating patterns that have kept you emotionally exhausted for years. Because every time you choose peace over pursuit, every time you choose intention over impulse, every time you reclaim your attention from things outside your control, you become a little stronger, not louder, not colder, stronger. And strength like that doesn't need to announce itself. People notice it naturally. More importantly, you notice it. The Stoics believed that the greatest achievement in life wasn't wealth, status, or admiration. It was becoming someone who could remain steady regardless of changing circumstances. Someone who didn't abandon their principles when life became uncomfortable. Someone whose peace couldn't be bought with praise or stolen by criticism. That kind of person doesn't need to chase opportunities. They prepare themselves and opportunities arrive. They don't chase respect. They live in a way that earns it quietly. They don't chase happiness. They cultivate a mind capable of creating it from within. That is the hidden lesson behind everything we've explored. Real power doesn't come from making people miss you. It comes from no longer needing them to complete your sense of worth. Because the moment your happiness depends entirely on yourself, no one else has the power to take it away. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on one area of your life where you've been giving away too much of your attention. Perhaps it's a relationship, a friendship, a workplace, or even a fear that has quietly controlled your decisions. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experience may encourage someone else who is learning the same lesson. And if you're committed to building a calmer mind, stronger character, and a life guided by timeless Stoic wisdom, subscribe and join us for more lessons that transform ancient philosophy into practical guidance for everyday life. Until next time, remember this. The people who leave the deepest impression are rarely the ones who chase attention. They're the ones who have mastered themselves so completely that their peace speaks louder than their words ever could.